Our reaction was a sort of raw masculine humor. Men would understand that. The entire game was outrageously funny and frightening. Other experiences were much more profound and complex. They involved more curious craft and objects. We met both small and tall, lizard-like beings and ordinary men who seemed to walk up to us from nowhere. This next series of slides will be the crafts, the objects, the beings, and the men we encountered during the more complex experiences. The left figure is the large booth. It had features similar to the small booth and bell-shaped object. This was the object from which the mysterious voice most often asked me if I would like to travel with them to their homeland. The middle object was the van-like object I only saw a few times. The right figure was the lodge-like or elliptical-shaped object in which a variety of things occurred, including education, especially lectures about history and the future. The upside-down bathtub at the left carried people from place to place most often. I beg your pardon, that's the next one. The upside-down bathtub at the left carried people from place to place and functioned as a conditioning and educational chamber at times. I've been told by a friend who has been connected to the military that she has recently seen a video of a craft similar to this, as if it is a recent military project. Okay, I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry. Also, there's another friend here today that said she has seen this object in one of those real living UFO dreams. The next is the elongated saucer. This is the one that carried people from place to place most often. The teepee in which we received more information about the Native Americans always had strange historic symbols on it. Isn't that interesting? In the tent-like object, I suffered several severe conditioning sessions. I felt excruciating forces on my body and mind. Others and I had some very profound experience in this large object. Most often, they levitated us to it. Again, it was awesome. These small at times these small lizard-like beings seem to be having fun. They sometimes look more like small alligators, or these were two different types of beings. The tall lizard-like beings normally piloted the craft and sometimes educated us. Believe it or not, they were very calm, reserved, especially kind and dignified. These ordinary but mysterious men also educated us, guided us during the encounters, and kept us informed. They also were kind and somewhat dignified, but they were more intense in their various tasks, being men. During these more complex experiences, I was to find more meaning. I learned who they were and what they were doing, for instance. And I discovered more about the statements espoused so often by the voice about eternal knowledge and wisdom and the Indians and buffalo. During one experience in western Nebraska, for example, my relatives and I were slowly and carefully levitated into the large object with the aid of two tall, kind, lizard-like beings. The craft hovered several hundred feet above the ground. We met a very old lizard-like being who scolded my uncles for giving me so much trouble because of the experiences. He said he had lived for centuries. A brilliant light shone down on me, and my relatives could see my bones through my flesh. Since I didn't see myself during that experience, I'm showing you another time when I saw the light shine down on another young fellow. The old bean told my relatives not to give me trouble because I was going to help my fellow man in the future. Isn't that interesting? But the most profound episode in this large object during this encounter was a program I witnessed on what seemed to be a common TV set. It was like we normally watch a videotape on a TV. The moderator of the program suggested that the Native Americans had some better ways to live. The program demonstrated how white America had destroyed some of nature with blight. Our white culture was being compared to the Native Americans hunting buffalo on the plains. Only once did they put me on an examination table. This was the first encounter I remembered. It occurred around 1951 at the Bethany Grade School playground near my home in Lincoln. We were waiting to watch an outdoor evening movie on the playground. Like many experiences, it lasted for hours. I was about 13 years old and 30 to 50 people were present, but not inside the craft during the examinations. A windowed saucer landed on the ground. Then 3 very human-like men got out. One was very human with hair. One had a bald head, and the other was a more gangly human-like creature. The friend with me and I were told we would have to improve ourselves as human beings. We were told this by 2 tall lizard-like beings who seemed very old. And of all things, they talked about antiquity for a time. Then they gave us a lecture about modern America, American heroes, and the Native Americans. They put us through separate, excruciating conditioning sessions inside this elliptical-shaped object so we could improve as human beings. We felt strong forces on our bodies and minds. We mysteriously forgot this episode during the course of this lengthy encounter. A little later, they levitated 4 or 5 others and I individually into the saucer, which hovered about 80 feet above the entire crowd. I was the last to go up, and I got petrified. It was the most frightening time of my life. Still is. Yet some of my trek to the craft was somewhat like a ceremony, and I began to settle down after a time. During my ascent, I saw a demonstration, and I was told about all things the Masonic Lodge, one of the cornerstones of our culture. As a matter of fact, they encouraged me to join the DMLA, which is the Young Men's Auxiliary Organization of the Masonic Lodge. I know now the ceremony was similar to ceremonies used by the Masonic Lodge. When we entered the saucer, we went up a couple of ramps, and a couple of these small lizard-like, alligator-like creatures greeted me in ceremonial fashion. I know now this was a very short version of ancient Egypt's god Ra's journey to the underworld. I also know now that the Masonic Lodge has its roots within ancient Egypt's pyramids. But the lodge has changed over the centuries and is something very different today. It seemed as if they, whoever they truly were, had deep roots in history. I became extremely concerned and puzzled when my guide told me these small alligator-like creatures were in charge of my lifelong education and development. He indicated I didn't really have a choice in the matter. After my guide and I ascended into the center of the craft, the other human-like creatures helped me up on the examination table. The short, bald man began to examine my legs as if he were a doctor. He then stepped away into more brilliant light. The gangly being wore a wig as if it were a female to make me feel more comfortable, she said. Now get this, she asked me how I'd like to have this short, bald man for my neighbor. She asked me how I liked his features. Well, I told her I thought his hair was too short and fuzzy, you could hardly see it. Red hair. I like red hair, but it was too short and fuzzy. And I was just a kid. And I didn't particularly like his small nose and his small cauliflower ears. She seemed disappointed. Then she said, well, would it be all right if he lived a block or 2 away? I didn't really catch her humor until after my flood of recollections about 40 years later. I had been so upset during this experience, I didn't really realize they might have been suggesting they had plans to be our neighbors, or they were planning then a future generation of humans. Even though I didn't get it, they obviously had a great sense of humor. I wonder what that might mean. The bald man returned and continued to handle my legs. He told me I would have varicose veins in my later years. I got shocked when he told me I would have a heart attack and heart surgery. I got even more petrified when he told me I would have more than one heart attack and surgery. He said the bad veins in my legs would have something to do with it. But he told me not to worry, that I would survive but be restricted. The short, bald man guided a large, shiny cylinder into my lower abdomen before I left the saucer. I felt a strange sensation. Then as I descended, I could hear the female scolding me for not being a good boy. She informed me I would now treat others more kindly because they knew what I did. It was as if they could somehow see through solid structures and know my innermost thoughts and feelings. Many other things happened during this encounter. I thought it was interesting after I had finished this drawing that I had used the last letters of the word garage on the sign. It spells rage. I sometimes feel rage. Pardon me, I'm going to take a drink here. I'd like to give you a little more information about the many other a few of the many other complex experiences. The friend with me and I were given symbolic lessons on courage, for instance, and we were shown how to pass through the walls of this craft. More than once, they told us to care for the wildlife and forests and to keep them healthy and natural. They said our forefathers in this particular area hadn't done a very good job. This was in the wilderness at Bog Lake, north of Du Bois, Wyoming. They gave me scientific demonstrations on propulsion at times and showed me how the craft could quickly appear, disappear, change size, and change form. They even told me to take related formulas to the United States Air Force during this 1970s experience, which of course I haven't done. I can't even recall the formulas. Once my father disappeared in a pure blue beam of light that slowly descended from a hovering large booth. Then he and another man, both wildlife conservation officers, were lectured about their responsibilities and jobs while they were inside the booth. Could this and other similar encounters indicate they are influencing our current environmental movement? They asked me to take a trip with them to their homeland several times, but I nearly always declined because I didn't really know who they were or what they were up to. Would you go if they asked you? No takers, I don't blame you. I remember much, much more, yet there were periods during some experiences I still can't remember. One 1957 experience I remember completely, a bizarre odyssey. It lasted from an early supper until well after dawn. I believe it's significant that they begin the experience immediately after we finish supper. That is, they seem to have waited until we finished supper. My friend and I were at a remote fire guard cabin a few miles west of the town of Du Bois, Wyoming. Like most experiences, this one occurred firmly on the ground. My friend and I met a gruesome tall lizard-like being inside the cabin. We also met outside the cabin some of the mysterious men I mentioned earlier who walked up to us from what seemed to be nowhere. Yet I saw one of them come walking out of a volume of distorted atmosphere. Then he, like the others, stood right beside us, and everything seemed to be completely natural. This was not a dream nor a spiritual experience in some other dimension. During the course of this entire night, they intensely conditioned and educated us. We learned about the craft, which were allegedly connected to history. They told us about those who were normally unseen inside the craft, those who orchestrated the experiences. They were the monitors of the earth, a brotherhood who had been active in prehistory during the ancient Egyptian culture and during biblical times and during more modern times. They were responsible to a hierarchy, we were told, and they were not allowed to interfere with the affairs of humankind except at certain times in history, when things were going awry or when things were dangerous. They said this was one of those times, one of those eras. But they couldn't do anything to us or say anything to us that wasn't approved by the hierarchy. In other words, the hierarchy would only allow us to hear and see those things we heard and saw. They said they were fighting a battle and trying to enlist us into their battle and brotherhood to save men. They said they were preparing people for a time when they would return and take them away. Those qualified and willing would go. Those not qualified or willing would stay and suffer some kind of consequence that I don't remember. It seemed as if I had to make a choice whether to go or stay. They told us about Christ and the churches. We allegedly met the Archangel Michael, who was a part of the hierarchy. When we met him, we heard a voice and saw nothing but a brilliant light very close to us. They told us about the Archangel Gabriel and more about the Brotherhood and Masonic Lodge and some other organization I don't remember. I met other completely natural people that night near the fire guard cabin. They were in a craft that had just arrived and landed on the ground. Some of these people seemed familiar. Those orchestrating the experience told us we would all be involved in a vast ET human project at some time in the future. A white guide and Indian guide coaxed my friend and I out of our bodies once. They told us more about the Native Americans and about horses. We rode horses with them in the air while out of our bodies. Back on the ground, we met other men who had invented some important scientific apparatus. They had taken their assignments very seriously, we were told, and that's what was expected of us. They also told us about another ancient human brotherhood to which the inventors belonged. It seemed as if those who orchestrated the experience had also orchestrated our scientific progress through, of all things, a brotherhood. My friend and I and the people, those familiar strangers with whom I would be involved, met Latin American orphans. Of all people, Latin American orphans. Our guides told all of us more about the future project, and they encouraged all of us to participate willingly in the project, especially for the benefit of the orphans. Isn't that interesting? We saw the holographic manifestation of a future building, and they lectured us about construction techniques in general and about history, which seemed strange. The construction techniques seemed strange. They also told me to bring another fellow who worked with us back to this same location the following night, and we amazingly endured another lengthy experience with him that next night. Among other things, it involved more information about the horses. A day or so later, my friend and I flew in craft through time to eastern Nebraska, stopping a few places along the way. Yes, I did say through time. This was bizarre. How can people actually travel through time in a craft, not to mention stopping a few places along the way? Before we left the fire guard cabin in western Wyoming, a mysterious lady came walking out of an immense volume of fog. She showed and told us more about the Latin American immigrants. She walked back into the fog and it dissipated. We had lunch, believe it or not, then left the cabin in the upside-down bathtub shortly after high noon. I believe it's interesting that they interrupted the experience so we could eat lunch. Traveling in the tub was especially weird because we fogged out at times and couldn't see ourselves or the ground below, only illuminated fog. At other times, we saw clearly. A little side note here. It took me some time during my recollection that this is actually what we saw from the ground as we watched a craft moving. A craft would often disappear in the distorted atmosphere while at the same time or a short time later reappear ahead of itself. It would move a distance, then repeat the same bizarre disappearance and reappearance. When the craft was not visible from the ground is when I figure we fogged out while riding inside the craft. Isn't that amazing? In other words, we were invisible when we were in the craft during the fog out. Continuing the fire guard cabin time travel, we rendezvoused with those same familiar strangers high in the sky near Rawlins, Wyoming. Then again, but on the ground during our last temporary stop in Lincoln. We continued to fly through time and landed at a particular location in eastern Nebraska near Omaha. A large building was being constructed. It was another very lengthy odyssey, but in the future. It was as real as anything I have ever experienced. We saw many people working in and all around the building. In short, we witnessed what the others and I were to do in the future, especially for the benefit of the orphans. We even actually lived some of those future events. They showed me so many details of the construction of the building. During this and another encounter, I have already drawn the plans, the preliminary plans. We dropped off the familiar strangers near Rawlins, Wyoming on our way back to the cabin, then landed after the sun had set. I had many other time travels with others to different locations, mostly in the 1950s. We saw the same familiar strangers and other people in other buildings. It's all to be a part of the large project that involves many people. The project is designed to help upgrade humankind, especially those who are less fortunate or aware. How you doing out there? Are you still with me? Okay. I can't see your reaction, so I don't know if you're with me or not. And I have to take another drink. I'm sorry. Others and I saw many buildings from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This was during what I call the lengthy time travel experiences and shorter time travel episodes. The time travels were all very real and involved at least what we know of the three dimensions. They also involved very large defined volumes of distorted atmosphere, haze and fog during the transitions. I believe this is a very important point scientifically. I wish somebody would research this besides me. Beg pardon? Are they? I don't think it should have gone. Thank you. We saw spiritual learning centers, hospitals that practice medical and spiritual healing, schools and small college complexes that used advanced teaching methods, housing units, especially for the Latin American immigrants, many of whom were adults, office buildings and multi-purpose buildings. I still remember most all of the exact sites of all of these future and existing buildings we are to use. I'll have to answer questions a little later if you don't mind. We were even told that a part of the first building is to be used by various so-called ET cultures as a UFO headquarters for the Middle United States. They showed and told us this diverse group of ETs would work in concert in a separate program to help humans. I got repulsed by the thought of it. Still, it seemed as if many UFO encounters would continue far into the future. It also seemed as if the center of American culture eventually would be in the Middle United States. Even though we saw many future happenings during the time travels, we primarily were shown only those things the familiar strangers and I would be involved, in which the familiar strangers and I would be involved. In other words, it was a very personal trip into the future. Most of my assignments will be very earthly. They're basically related to the design and construction of buildings. There is much, 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 much more that we don't have time to cover today. I could probably talk to you for a year, taking time out for eats and sleep, and still not give you all of the information related to these experiences. Well, after I had recalled my enormous number of experiences in the spring of 1987, I got astonished even more because I not so coincidentally met these same familiar strangers in eastern Nebraska, some 30-plus years after the time travels. This was an extremely bizarre confirmation of my many memories. I was shocked when I first met them. The people were meeting weekly to improve themselves in an existing building that my friends and I had visited during one of the time travel episodes in the 1950s. I recognized nearly everyone in the room when I first met them, but I couldn't yet place them. Yet it was astonishing. In 1988 and 1989, a couple of years after my flood of recollections, I nearly died from health problems. My health problems were caused, at least in part, by fear, anxiety, and frustration because all of it was so astonishing. Again, this was just after I was asked to go public, so to speak, and here I am. I suffered a severe heart attack, then underwent coronary bypass surgery. The veins in my leg that were used to do the bypass proved to be inferior. I had varicose veins. They ballooned and clogged, causing more heart attacks. I subsequently had another coronary bypass surgery. If you remember, this is exactly what the short, bald man told me during my experience on the examination table some 38 years earlier. I have since undergone such severe health problems I don't care to remember. Yet I've survived, as you can see, but I'm restricted, just as I was told some 50 years ago. In 1987 and 1988, and later, the familiar strangers and I got together almost weekly. We exchanged some information. Even though all could not say for certain we remembered the same time travel experiences, we discovered we had experienced at least some different types of encounters. Some of us are still amazed we had been shown and told some of the exact same things during our respective experiences, in some cases down to the minute scientific or technical details. There was no mistake. It's amazing that these individuals were already doing what I was shown they would do during the time travels. Since that time, we have done some other things I was shown we would do during the time travels, and the others didn't know about my memories at those times. I even met some of the same Central American or Latin American orphans with whom I had traveled in craft some 30 years earlier. They were already being adopted by American families. The familiar strangers and I also have had more than coincidental things occur between us. Some of these more than coincidences were awesome. 3 of us separately located the site for the first building, for instance, from the information we had received during our respective experiences. We located the site within 500 yards of each other. It was amazing. Without a doubt, the many facets of our collective experiences and these astonishing coincidences suggest that some mysterious someone is orchestrating our lives, at least to some degree. We all somewhat represent a cross-section of American culture, and this has all greatly affected our beliefs and feelings. I know other contactees and abductees across the country have had similar experience, and probably some of you here tonight. Even though other contactees don't recall their experiences being as extensive as mine, I strongly suspect some of them were. Therefore, I can only conclude that those who orchestrate the experiences and the experiences themselves all lie at the very foundation of our human culture. Slick fingers. What does this really mean? It means to me for certain we are not totally who we think we are. Not as individuals, not as a society. We are much, much more, but possibly not as independent as we'd like to believe. In other words, UFOs might be more a part of our lives than we dare or care to think. Multiply my enormous number of experiences by thousands or millions, and you can get a good idea how UFO experiences might be affecting our lives and cultures. I didn't read much during the few years after my recollections. Then I read several UFO books and reread the Bible. I found my experiences somewhat fit Zachariah Sitchin's Earth Chronicles and Lowell's God Hypothesis. You know, Joe Lowell is a godsend to me with his book, The God Hypothesis. When I first read it in 1998, I told Annie, thank God, now I won't have to write my second book. That's because Joe came up with many of the same conclusions I had, again, about a decade earlier, concerning my experiences. This should tell you something about the validity of Dr. Lowell's hypothesis. I highly recommend his book if you are earnestly interested in understanding UFO phenomena. I also found my experiences supported Bramley's Gods of Eden, Belay's Dimensions, Mac's Abductions, some of Bud Hopkins' works, Davenport's Visitors from Time, some of Strieber's works, and a number of others, including the Urantha book, which is very interesting. Hertog's Keys of Enoch, as an example, describes some future activities in eastern Nebraska very similar to some of my time travels. It was so similar it knocked my socks off. My experiences are somewhat compatible with the Greek classics and ancient Egyptian literature, as well as others. What was taught during some of my experiences is very close to what the Native Americans are teaching today. Some new and ancient ideas I witnessed during the future time travels are strongly influencing our society today. The phenomena others and I witnessed also seems very close to some aspects of the holographic universe, as it is described in Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe. The bizarre phenomena others and I witnessed during the encounters are even described nearly perfectly in the Bible from Genesis through Revelations, especially the small whirlwinds, when the angels showed up and when the voice of God spoke from a cloud of fog, or from a brilliant light, or from thin air. Even a phenomena witnessed by Peter, James, and John during the Transfiguration seems very close to what we saw on a few occasions, especially when the others could see my bones through my flesh, and when I could see a few others illuminated in some very strange ways. As I stated previously, my experiences have affected my life dramatically, even my vocations. Why was I an engineer most of my life when I didn't really want to be an engineer? Was it because I was told I would be an engineer during a UFO encounter just before I entered high school? Were circumstances manipulated from behind the scenes all those times I tried to get out of engineering? Did the short, bald man simply see into the future when he told me I would have heart attacks in my later years? Or was that their plan all along, so I would be restricted and I have time to study my experiences, tell others about them, write about them, and participate at least to some degree in the project? All of this is to be a part of my task according to what I was shown and lived during the future time travels. I know many other UFO experiencers are shown and told many other things. For a moment, as you listen to me talk, I'd again like you to examine your own thoughts and feelings. How do you feel about helping others? What do you think about history? Why do you like art or classical music, if you do, that is? Why do you become depressed or ecstatic for no apparent reason? Why don't you get along with your wife or your husband? Why do you do the things you do? Where do some of your feelings and thoughts come from, really? Why are you so obsessed with UFOs, if you are, that is? And why are you here today? Is it because you simply spontaneously create thoughts in your mind and feelings in your body? Or is it possible at least some of your thoughts and feelings have been directly or subtly influenced by experiences you still don't remember? Where did Einstein get his ideas? Red Cloud, Franklin, Edison, Sitting Bull, Freud, Tesla, Washington, Crazy Horse, and our other founding fathers and mothers. Did they encounter strange phenomena? In some cases, history suggests they did. Some Native Americans know their leaders did. With whom do the Native Americans communicate? Those who are normally beyond the veil of the visible. Who were the ancient gods? And who was the historic God of the Old and New Testaments, really? Were they connected with UFOs? Some modern UFO information suggests they were. I believe many of us are motivated through clandestine experiences we don't remember, at least to some degree. I feel my life has been shaped by my experiences, and as amazing as it may sound, I strongly suspect I'm being influenced, at least subtly, through some kind of spontaneous mind control, or ESP, from another or other dimensions. Another way to put it is this. Because the encounters are not remembered, they become subliminal experiential messages that subtly mold or shape our lives and cultures. Let me repeat that. Because the encounters are not remembered, they become subliminal experiential messages that subtly mold or shape our lives and cultures. That is, the experience itself is the subliminal message that eventually becomes a part of who we are. Our subconscious memory of the experience changes our attitudes, beliefs, and feelings. Well, as you can probably guess, I have become somewhat of a rebel. I refuse to commit myself totally to the project, for instance, unless I can have some confirmation. At least one more overt experience with direct questions and the right answers. But they told me during my last encounter in August of 1986, if I chose to discontinue the experiences, I wouldn't have another overt encounter. It was my choice, my one and only choice there and then. Again, they said if I remembered, it would negate the purpose of the encounters. I don't remember choosing, but I must have chosen subconsciously not to continue because a short time later I had my flood of recollections. And I've had but a couple of brief sightings and just several mysterious occurrences since 1986. If I hadn't remembered so much, I probably would have gone on my merry way being influenced according to plan. Yet they somehow knew I would have heart attacks that would be related to my recollections. How can this be? In the end, I see my experiences and others like them in part as a continuation of the UFO revelations offered to us by researchers such as Joe Lewell and Zacharias Sitchin. I've benefited and suffered greatly because of my recollections. Because I've suffered, I can't really recommend that others try to recall their own experiences. If you do, you might be upsetting the overall plan, not to mention your entire life, all of which affects all of humankind. Maybe we should upset their plans. On the other hand, their plans might include recalling your experiences if you've actually had UFO experiences. Your recollections might benefit all of us if you choose to remember. The choice is yours, at least subconsciously or clandestinely. If you do recall extensive UFO experiences, my advice is to get help immediately. But if you haven't had UFO experiences, you need to know that you are just as important in the immense plan as the rest of us. Well, thank God I'm at the end here. Well, I've experienced an enormous number of so-called UFO encounters. If I have, so have many, many others, even throughout history. Your UFO experiences, if you've had them, my experiences, legendary in history, all seem to suggest UFOs always have influenced and are at least partly responsible for a human culture, through at least some of our lives individually, possibly even through our deepest beliefs and thoughts and feelings at times, at least at certain times in history. It's time we get on with it. It's time we try to understand UFO details more deeply. But live, love, and be happy, and smile at the next UFO contactee or abductee you see, especially me. She or he might be carrying at least one small detail that would unravel just one of the many mysteries in our shared eternal universe. Thank you for being so attentive. Number one. Okay. That's basically my talk, but I would like to entertain some questions. How much time do we have? Is Lou around? Or? We have 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to have to go right into the closing. So we'll go into the speaker deal. And Craig, if you would hit number 5. A part of my imminent discovery is that I know nothing for sure. Right. However, these, among many other things, I believe I've learned from my UFO experiences, and you can follow along here if you can read it and you wish. We're going to cover some lofty ideas. Because of the out-of-body experiences and the mysterious manifestations of the crafts, the beings, and the men, I believe life is infinite and eternal. And I believe I am because I simply believe I know. Number 2, UFO mystery and conflict in themselves create change, new thought. UFOs are real, but enormously more complex than we dare to think. Many close UFO encounters are meant to be symbolic. In many ways, they are a key to our future intergalactic, multidimensional citizenship. Some of them are designed in such a way so we are forced to face our own selves, our own demons, our hidden dreams. They are experiential mirrors that can show us who we truly are. They are future mirrors that can show us who we might become. They are at least subliminal messages that are aimed at changing individuals, thus our cultures, even throughout history. You, like our entire culture, are being profoundly influenced now by mysterious UFO intelligences. And I assure you, I am not an ET. They have an immense detailed plan for all of humankind. Do not use the outhouse when UFOs are around. Right, don't go into the teepee. The ETs I encountered are likely who they said they were, the monitors or keepers of the earth from its early beginnings. They are ethereal time travelers as well as interdimensional travelers. They are the engineers of the earth, and they had a hand in our creation. They're responsible to a hierarchy of whom little is known. They don't want to deal with humans on a personal or cultural level, just see to it that we carry out their plans for their benefit and for the benefit of humankind. There is either an actual ET Star Wars on our horizon, or the intelligences simply want us to believe this, so we will quit killing each other. So we will cooperate as individuals and nations in preparation for such a fictitious battle. Perception of time, space, and earthly reality is like art. It's strictly relative to the experience of the beholder. You can bet your bottom dollar our collective perception of all reality is presently only the very tip of the immense multi-reality iceberg. If we dare to learn, we need to open up the public UFO discussion. We need to include some of the more bizarre encounter details. And among other things, we need more philosophical input and input of all kinds from UFO experiencers. In their efforts to influence us, the UFO intelligences use techniques similar to overkill. Therefore, the most important question is, how do UFO experiences affect the lives of abductees and contactees? That is, what is the end result? If we would observe this closely, it would give us more insight into the ultimate purpose of UFO encounters. I believe Earth is not so much a genetic engineering laboratory as it is a growing field. It's a place from where multitudes of multidimensional eternal beings can gain unique experience. This most probably includes us. The mysterious intelligences I encountered were not so much studying us as they were teaching us. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. The mysterious intelligences are not so much studying us as they are teaching us. The intelligences I encountered, the ETs, the UFO, the ancient gods, were recruiting human workers who could possibly help bring about the next paradigm shift for humankind. Even though it might seem we are linked to the mysterious intelligences irrevocably in all areas, including science, religion, and history, I truly believe we have a choice in the matter, individually and collectively. We need to treat others more kindly. Our survival depends not only on our knowledge, but our personal and collective attitudes. Yet we should again realize that life is a process of growth, a process that includes the positive as well as the negative, which again, also like art, are in the eyes of the beholder. UFOs have been, are, and will be a part of the growth process. This and many other things indicate there is an illusion of time for everything. But in the end, it all really doesn't matter because we have to live our more practical lives, as my wife will tell you. At least most of the time. That is, in the illusion of time, and if in the illusion of time, in the illusion of space. Number 6, Craig. And because we have to live our more practical lives, who needs these high-minded ideas? For now, we can just take them and store them in the outhouse. Or at least in the deepest recesses of our subconscious minds. I wish you all the best of everything. Thanks for listening.